we become what we think about. So if you're thinking about hockey or football or whatever, that's great, but that's not going to get you to that point where you can make work a choice instead of a necessity. 92% of the population that is primarily basing their retirement on one of these plans, where there's the 401k here in the US or the equivalent can. 92% of people are not going to get there. They're going to have to work longer, or they're going to have to seriously reduce their lifestyle expectations to match the income based on that mountain of money or nest egg. It's all we know. So I wrote an article on my blog. It's called "Why Do Your 401k Sucks?" Question. It's all people know. It's just shoved at them all the time, and their whole circle of friends and family and colleagues are all doing the same thing. So it's hard to go against the tide when there's this one guy that's saying your 401k sucks, and why would you believe him, right?
Well, welcome everyone to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of The Awakened Man and your host, Alan DeMonso. How does your financial future look? Are you relying on government investment programs, banking programs, and other traditional methods? See, the challenges is these and other similar programs will likely not get you to where you hope to be. So what is the alternative? Well, today my guest is going to touch on that. And he's actually hopefully going to touch on about 13 different categories for unconventional investments that, when deployed correctly, can close the gap to where you are today and to where you want to be. Now, before we get into all that, I just want to remind you to hit like, subscribe, and share on your favorite platform to stay updated on the latest content, as well as helping me grow the Awakened Man message. And for that, I just want to say I'm truly grateful. So why don't we get on with today's episode?
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
As you know, it's customary, I like to ask a couple of opening questions just to set the stage for us for today's talk. So what size of nest egg do you need to retire the way you want? And are you on track to getting there? Many of us don't even know what the size of that nest egg is, other than responding, well, I need $1 million. Now that might have worked 10, maybe 20 years ago, but is that enough today? And it really all depends on our lifestyle choices, doesn't it? And the kind of investment vehicles that we're choosing to use. Well, today my guest is going to share how he turned his financial story around in just 9 short years. So allow me to introduce Chris Odegard. Chris is an alternative investment blogger and an educator. He's the author of Get Off Your Ass and Manage Your Money, Why You Need Alternative Investments. Well, Chris is teaching, through his teachings, he exposes conventional investing wisdom from what it truly is, which is being seriously flawed. So much so that, in fact, 92% of Americans, and I would suggest I'm a Canadian, that we're probably not far behind, will never have an abundant retirement lifestyle, much less achieve financial freedom at a younger age. So if you want to build your wealth at an accelerated pace with less risk, taxation, volatility, you owe it to yourself and your family to learn about alternatives so you can make the best educated decision on which path that you want to be on. Welcome to the show, Chris. How are things today?
They're awesome. Thanks so much for having me on, Alan. You hit a couple things right there that just kind of launched me right into, my thoughts on this. So where do you want to begin?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Well, you know what? And all the work that I do with men, we always talk about everyone being on our own hero's quest or our own hero's journey. And so tell us a little bit about your journey and how the challenges you've had in your life has shaped you into being who you are today and what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I was a conventional investor, just like most Americans are and most Canadians are, putting their money in these government, plans and hoping that we get to that nest egg number, whatever that is. And we can talk about that later, because I think the way we think about that is all backwards. So I did that for, longer than I care to admit. If any of your listeners read Cash Flow Quadrant, I was an E. I was an employee. I grew up with E's. That's all I know. Owning a business or being a serious investor, other than, plowing money into a 401k here in the US, that's all I knew. and it was, I call it being on, and I got to trademark this. I was on the 401k highway to mediocrity, and I didn't even know it was, I didn't even know it, but that's the highway I was on. Yeah. And it was going about as well as that goes, I was taught to, go to college, get a degree, get a job with benefits, work till you're 65, that whole load of crap, frankly.
Yeah.
And so that was going mediocre. And then in my mid 40s, something happened. My 19-year marriage ended, and I lost 55% of my assets and thousands of dollars a month in cash flow. And, in my mid 40s, I was looking at an even worse future than the mediocre path that I was on. And just coincidentally, a friend of mine said, "Hey, Chris, you should read this book. You should read this book." And I bought the book and I set it on, somewhere, and it sat there. And of course, the book was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And I read that, and, it was like a light bulb went off, like it has for millions of other people. And I went, wow, there's a different way, and I'm going to go down that path. And so, conventional investments are everything that's traded on the stock market. That's your conventional investments. Everything else is an alternative. That includes every class of real estate and a whole bunch of other things. And so I started moving down that path. And 9 years later, when I looked back at that, 9 years later, I had recouped all that money, multiplied it many times over, and I fired the man, quit my corporate job, and I never have to work again if I don't want to. And that would have never happened had I stayed on that 401k highway to mediocrity. So that's how I got there. And so I started my blog at theprolificinvestor.net, and I said, everybody needs to know about this. I mean, how many men and women go through a financial thing like that, whether it's divorce or bankruptcy or a financially crippling medical thing, and they just go, well, I guess my lifestyle in the future is just going to have to be way less than I thought it was. Well, it doesn't have to be that way, and so that's what I write about and blog about, and that's kind of how I went from there to here. So now I'm just living down here in South Carolina, where it's sunny all the time, and like riding motorcycles and driving my Corvette and talking to guys like you and your audience. And hopefully we could prevent a young person from ever getting on that highway, or we could get somebody to take the next exit. That's kind of the goal.
Yeah. So. I love that story and love it. For a big reason is that I too went through a divorce in my early 30s, actually at 30, and lost everything. And it's been a long haul. And I really wished at the time I would have got a chance like you did to really come across some of Kiyosaki's work and to start making different choices, because I think that's such an important part of your story, is that you're in a position after your divorce that you could have made a completely different decision and decided just to cave and not look at making changes in your life. And you didn't do that. You went after it, right? You probably with a little bit of help. And so you started to talk a little bit about conventional, investing, but what is the wisdom behind what the conventional investing piece is? Like, what is it that they're trying to sell us basically?
Well, conventionally, all the publicly traded stuff, it makes a lot of money for other people. If you give your money to a financial advisor and you say, hey, I would like you, most people go, I'm not smart in this area. I've got this job. I'm good at that. And I do that. And I'm not a financial person. So I'm going to trust that the guy that, was recommended to me and the conventional investing world. So you give him his money, you give him your money, and he says, and he will charge you something upfront, maybe, and something called AUM, asset under management fee, and he will build you a diversified portfolio. So he says, but there are 4 asset classes. There's the paper, which is stocks, bonds, and mutual fund. There's private equities, private shares of small business. There's real assets like real estate, and there's commodities. Well, he built you a diversified portfolio in one asset class, paper. What about the other 3 assets? He doesn't help you in that area at all. So you're not really diversified. And the interesting thing is, he's going to make money whether you make money or lose money. He gets paid either way. Now, obviously, he gets paid more when you make money because the volume of your account is higher. But and then something really interesting about mutual funds is that mutual fund is just a basket of stocks and bonds that are packaged together and sold as a unit. And so there's trading that goes on inside that mutual fund. They're buying and selling things all the time. So you could actually begin your balance at the beginning of the year could be, $500,000. And at the end of the year, it could be $400,000. And you would have to pay taxes because they traded stuff and there were capital gains along the way. So even though you lost money, you could still get a tax bill. And the guy is going to take his fee as well. And people are just, they're just, and I've got some stuff behind this. 92% of the population that is primarily basing their retirement on one of these plans, whether it's the 401k here in the U.S. or the equivalent can. 92% of people are not going to get there. They're going to have to work longer, or they're going to have to seriously reduce their lifestyle expectations to match the income based on that mountain of money or nest egg, as you were calling it. So it's a bad system, man. It's really bad. And when something doesn't work for 92%, I mean, I went to public school, so that means it only works for 8%. If I get an 8% on a test, even in public school in the United States, that's a failure, man.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a failure up here in Canada as well. And our equivalent is an RRSP plan, registered retirement savings plan. Right. Same idea. Really, it's a tax deferred vehicle, and you're absolutely right. You're paying 2, 4, could be 6% to these money managers to look after your money, and really, we're not really taking ownership for it. And so, so you start to touch on why it's not working, and that makes sense. And then you just start talking about the one asset class. Expand a little bit more on the other three, and maybe we can get into some of those 13 categories I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah. So, and I didn't make this stuff up. I got this from Tom Wheelwright. He wrote the book Tax-Free Wealth. He's the smartest tax guy down. Probably, he's regularly touted as the smartest tax guy in the U.S. and probably everywhere else. But he talks about the 4 asset classes. So the paper asset class, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, all that kind of stuff, and then real assets. Things you can touch: real estate, every category of real estate, business machines, ATMs. Commodities would be, coal and gas and beef and grain. And then the other one is private shares of small businesses or private equity. And so that's the whole investing landscape. But, the people that are in front of us all the time with the advertisements and everything, the Schwabs, the TD Ameritrades, they're only working in that one asset class. And I have a friend who's a conventional investor, and I asked him one time, I said, well, why don't you guys advise people about alternatives, the other 3 asset classes? And he said there's 2 reasons. Because there's automated easy money in the paper asset class. And the other thing he said is that if I say you should go out and buy General Electric and General Electric goes bankrupt, I'm never going to get sued. If I suggest that you, as a financial planner, go out and invest in this private company and that goes bankrupt, he says, I could get sued. So there's 2 good reasons, one, or two reasons, but for better or worse, about why most advisors don't advise, outside of the paper assets.
Yeah, I guess because of that regulation, right? It gives them a sense of protection, and they don't need to step outside of that. But really, it's the onus is on ourselves to take responsibility, just like you're talking about, right? And so we have to look at it. And maybe there's nothing wrong with having a portion of your money in something that's, depending on what your risk tolerance is to be into something that's a little, I'll call it safer. But we still, the topic really today is about how are we going to get to that nest egg, and how are you going to be able to maintain that lifestyle? Because why should we step back? Because we haven't done a good job. And I like how we're also talking about young folks. I have 2 young men, sons in their late 20s, and one just turned 30. And so it's important for the younger audience that listens to this podcast to understand and wrap their head around that, if you're not investing, you need to start. So tell me why, if the conventional wisdom isn't working, then why is everybody doing it? Like, Why are they not doing anything else? Are they not reading Robert's book,
Yep.
or what's going
Well,
on?
it's all we know. So I wrote an article on my blog. It's called "Why Do Your 401k Sucks." You know, if you're just traveling through your normal life, all your family, all your friends, all your coworkers, everybody's putting their money into an RRSP, and one guy comes along swimming against the tide and says that is a terrible investment vehicle. It's like when everybody thought the world was flat, and Galileo or whoever it was came around and said it's round. Well, that guy was crazy because everybody else, right? So that's what that's kind of the reason, because it's the tide is turning a little bit. People are tired of what's going on in the stock market and what government's doing with printing money and stuff like that. So it is changing, but the real answer to your question, it's all people know. It's just shoved at them all the time, and their whole circle of friends and family and colleagues are all doing the same thing. So it's hard to go against the tide when there's this one guy that's saying your 401k sucks, and why would you believe him, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because then it's that peer pressure, right? Now they have to deal with that as well. And if I make a mistake, and then, where's that support? But truly, there's lots of support out there now. You've been running this blog for a little while. And
Yep.
So whatever you're finding are the greatest challenges, like in the comments that you're facing, like what are the people asking you the most about the work that you're doing?
Well, there's and I wrote an article about this too. There's a double standard, right?
Yeah.
So so when I talk about the type of investing, self-storage, ATM machines, apartment buildings, crypto, gold, silver, people will say, well, that sounds risky. Are those investments guaranteed? And I say, well, no, they're not guaranteed, and neither are any of your investments unless you're the SEC, the regulatory unit here in the United States, says the only thing that's guaranteed are U.S. government bonds. Everything else carries some element of risk, but they consider their stuff safe because it's been through the rigor of the SEC and has gotten on the stock market. So they asked me, is my stuff guaranteed? Well, their stuff isn't guaranteed. So there's this double standard, right? Well, how do you know that person's not going to run off with your money? Well, have you heard of Enron or Volkswagen? I mean, it happens. Yeah. It happens in the publicly traded markets too. I will readily admit that it could happen easier probably here in the alternative world because these are unregulated private investments. But, the thing that I get to do that, conventional investors don't get to do is I can go meet the CEO or who's ever running this deal and take them out, and we can have a beer or a coffee or lunch or whatever. You don't get to call up the CEO of GE and say, hey, I want to get to know you and make a character judgment about you and your ethics and your company, right? Well, we get to do that. I mean, I just came back from a due diligence trip to Dallas and Santa Monica looking at the next thing that I want to do, and met the co-founders of this company. And, so you have that advantage, right? I mean, It takes a little bit more work, but it's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of great people, and so.
Yeah, for sure. I could just, that piece alone, getting an opportunity to be that close to it, it's to your investment and really getting a better understanding. Because sure, you can read all of the the quarterly reports and all of that, but it doesn't really give you a sense of what kind of businesses that they're truly running. And then when it's so large, what kind of influence are you going to have? But when you've got skin in the game, like you're talking about, and you get to meet, really important people, that they've got a passion for their job, you can get a sense of whether, how authentic they are and what kind of integrity they hold. It's a much different way to look at investing, isn't it?
It is. And, here's one of the things that I look at. I go, look, business is unpredictable. You have the economy, you have government regulations. We have a lot of things going on in the world right now. And what you could have started something 12 months ago or invested in something, and nobody knew that any of these headwinds were coming. But here's what I go, okay, well, I know this person, and I don't have to worry about them, their ethics or their integrity or their things could go wrong, and they're going to do the best job they can managing through it. And there's going to be some ups and downs, but it's not going to be because I'm in business with a criminal or an unethical person, right? And so that's the thing.
Right on. Now, listen, I want us to go back a little bit. And so when you got started there in your early 40s, and I just wanted to to help people talk, really give them paint a picture of like, how did you get started? Like, give us an idea of what your first few investments were like. What were some of the things that, that the thoughts that were going through your head, and how you had to pivot and make adjustments along the way.
Right. So the big thing about the alternative investment world is you have to be more educated. When employees join a company today, they get opted into the RRSP or the 401k for a certain amount of money, and you actually have to opt out. So you have to have no knowledge to do that. So after I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I was in my post-divorce apartment, which I fondly referred to as the van down by the river. If you ever saw the Chris Farley skit on Saturday Night Live, where he's the motivational speaker, and he lived in a van down by the river. So I lived in that place, and an advertisement came on the radio, and it was Robert Kiyosaki's organization. They were having a free seminar, 30 miles north of me. And of course, I'm like, yes, I am going. And on the day, so I signed up for that. And the day that I was supposed to go to that, my vehicle, which I still own, a 92 Ford F-150 pickup truck, wouldn't start. And I was like, I was so, I was in the zone. I mean, I was focused on this. I'm like, I have to go. So I found a company that would drop off a rental car, and I got to that seminar. And that seminar was, and if anybody who's gone through this educational process, the free seminar that led to the $500 weekend, which then led to a $15,000 training package for two people. And, I put $15,000 I didn't have on a credit card, and my high school age son at the time, 16, we went to like 12 different classes locally and at other places in the country to learn about all different aspects of real estate investing. And so that education was critical. And then my daughter was just going into her second year of college, and she said, Dad, I don't want to live in the dorm anymore. And I knew this was going to happen, right? She wants to move off campus. And I had said, well, I'll be darned if I'm going to pay somebody else's mortgage up there for 3 years. So it was during that time that President Obama had his first time home buyer tax credit program. So she and I bought a duplex together. It just means she was on the title, but since she was a first time homeowner, we got a $15,000 check that came along with that purchase. And there were 2 bedrooms. It was a duplex, 2 bedrooms side by side on each side. And so she lived in 1 bedroom, rented 1 in her side, and we rented the other 2. And so she did some of the property management, 100 miles away from me. And I did some of the stuff down here, and we owned that building for many years after she graduated. So that was the first investment. And then it just kind of, the thing about alternatives, there's so many options. People get frustrated when they say, well, what should I do? And I'm like, well, I don't know. What kind of investment are you? What investor are you? What's your risk tolerance? There's no Vanguard target retirement fund that I can say, go vest in that. I say, you have to figure out, do you want to be in notes or single family rentals, or do you want to be a rehabber or a flipper or a wholesaler? Do you want to do apartment syndications, self-storage? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And it's just this huge plate that you can choose from, but you have to figure that out for yourself. And all I can do is point people to the different resources that have been helpful for me. And you got to meet people, and you got to network, and just kind of immerse yourself in this new world. And you will figure out, probably after some trial and error, right? Yeah. You just want to make sure it's not too painful, which of those things just really kind of matches your personality and your skill set.
Yeah. And what I really like, love how you're putting this together, Chris, because what I like what you're saying is that nothing that you've talked about here is get rich quick. This isn't about, investing in something that's a fly by night. It took 9 years, and people might go, wow, geez, 9 years is a long time. Well, tell you what, where you are today and 9 years from now, if you don't make one change, how much closer will you be? And I would suggest that we're not any closer if we don't make a change. Right. And so, it's about taking those steps. And I like how you talked about, utilizing a program that already exists and using some education to help get that first first investment of yours, right?
Right. Yeah.
So who are the types of people then that are investing in alternatives? Obviously, we know there's the guys like Robert and doing that work, and yourself, but what kind of person is an individual that would invest in alternatives?
Well, that's a tough question. I would have to say that, through my going through this journey, and when I was still working at a company and sitting in an office where I was within 10 people were within 10 feet of me, and I could tell you that and they watched me go down this journey, and I could tell you that only 2 out of 10 did anything different than what they were already doing. So it's hard to say, well, who are the people that will do that? It's hard to say, but what type of person is that it's going to rise above the crowd and rise to the top? That's the type of person, and they're going to be in the minority. There have been the business that I'm looking at, the investment I'm looking at right now, it just sounds too good to be true. And so most people will go, whoop, too good to be true, must be illegal, immoral, or unethical. And what I have learned in my investing career is that to move toward those things carefully instead of run away from them, because I have made so much money on things that I had never heard of that sounded too good to be true, and they were true. And so it's the person that's going to strike out on a different path. They're going to go against the grain, and despite what everybody else is doing, they're going to take that different path. And there's not I don't know of a one way to describe that kind of person, because they come from all different places. Sometimes the person you would least expect it, right? It's just, what I'm going to go, and I'm going to go fast.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to go back and touch on, you mentioned the book Cash Flow Quadrant, and I truly like that book. But it made me wonder, as someone who's looking at being an alternative investor, what are the things that you're looking for? Are you looking for cash flow, or are you looking for more equity growth? Like, what are some of the ways that you're assessing? You would recommend people go and assess their investments?
Well, it's different for everyone. Unfortunately, this is going to be the repeating thing, but it's different for everybody. So if you go into the alternative investing world, there are people are syndicating car washes and ATMs and apartment buildings, and actually debt collection and notes. And there are so many things. And there's this kind of shiny object syndrome, you could just go everywhere. So as an individual investor, you have to set up some criteria, and I'll just give you a few of mine. So I look for appreciating assets. So that means it's any kind of real estate. That means a piece of business equipment like an ATM or a piece of earth moving equipment that doesn't qualify. So I go, okay, that's really interesting that somebody's got a fleet of dump trucks and they want me to be a part of the financing of buying this. That's a depreciating asset. So appreciating asset is one of mine. Second thing, just one of the other ones, is something that I can use leverage with. Means other people will loan me money to buy that asset. So that rules out all conventional investments, because no banker will loan you money to buy stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. But they will loan me money all day to buy a piece of real estate, for example. So you got to be able to use leverage, and it has to have a built-in tax benefit. Well, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, no built-in tax benefit. A real asset, now that could be a piece of business equipment, it could be real estate, has something called depreciation. So I could still be making a profit on my investment, but showing a loss for tax purposes. And that really just drives up your ROI. Think about it. When you're using somebody else's money and when you're gaining depreciation, you're just amplifying your returns. And yet from a tax standpoint, you might show a complete loss, even though your investment is very successful. So let's see. And it just has to have, in the over the history of the S&P 500 index in the US, the average return to the investor has been somewhere just shy of 10%, right?
Yeah.
Well, in my world, I don't do anything that doesn't generate 20% plus before the benefits of leverage and taxes. And so, I'm getting there. I'm getting to that end game so much faster just by changing what type of investment I use. And they're not necessarily riskier, right? Real estate is the oldest investment there is dirt. It's land. And somebody just puts something on top of it, right? And yet they're called alternative investments. And the stock market, which is a relatively new investment in the history of the world, when you look at the whole cycle, is what's conventional and normal, right? So I use the terminology, not because I think it's correct, but just because that's the terminology that is out there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're so true, right? Unless you're investing in a in a stock and the bonds, or if you're going to invest, in even just putting money in a savings account, God forbid, people are still just doing that, thinking they're going to get out of the hole. But it's just,
let me add one more thing to that list. So, and the other thing is, I like to invest in assets that are insurable. So when you have and think about this, people would never own a house and think about not having insurance on it. What if it burns down? What if something happens? But people will have way more than that in their RRSP or their 401k. Try going to an insurance agent saying, I'd like to insure the $1 million that I have in this account against loss, and they will laugh you out of the office. But my self-storage, my ATM machines, my apartment buildings, guess what? They're all insured. So if something happens to them, I'm not out. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So these are just a handful of the 13 different things that I compare conventional and alternative investments across.
Yeah. So that you were mentioning earlier, you have a blog, and so I just want to touch a little bit on your blog. So you put out weekly, monthly? How often are you putting content out?
Yeah, I put out an article. I was pretty consistently once a month, and then I had a shoulder surgery in January, and I was kind of out for a little bit. But yeah, I like to do it once a month. I really avoid anything that's like a job, trading time for money. So I put it out once a month, and that's about the right frequency for me to help people and do something that I enjoy, and it doesn't feel like work. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, for sure. Excuse me. So what's the best way for someone to learn a little bit more about alternatives? Obviously, they could go to a course, they could buy a book, but now that you've been doing this for a little while, 9+ years, what's the best way for someone to get started and really learn about this?
Well, this is going to sound very self-serving, but the reason I wrote the book, Get Off Your Ass and Manage Your Money, is because I thought, wow, my journey across those 9 years was 1 step forward, 3 steps back, 2 to the left, 5 to the right. Now, knowing what I know, I think I could draw a better picture of a straighter and narrower path that would be more efficient. So there are plenty of books, and I have a bunch of them on my website on the resources page, and mine is just one of them. But you've got, we become what we think about. Yes. So if you're thinking about hockey or football or whatever, that's great, but that's not going to get you to that point where you can make work a choice instead of a necessity. So you got to read the books, you got to get involved in you got to listen to the podcasts, like what we're doing right here, and start just putting that new information in your brain and get the other stuff about, the stock market and the mutual funds, out. And so on my resources page, I have a whole bunch of stuff that has helped me, the books, the podcasts, and some of the places where I get my investments. So
perfect.
At theprolificinvestor.net.
Right on. Excellent. Well, listen, of everything that we've talked about today, what was one thing that, or maybe what we haven't talked about, what's one thing that you would recommend as a takeaway for our listeners to remember?
I think people tend to stop learning after they graduate from high school or they graduate from college. And then for some reason, they think that everything else in life they can learn and do on their own.
Yeah.
The $15,000 that I spent on that class was just one of the many programs or mentoring programs that I have spent. And if I told people how much more money I had spent, they would think I was crazy. But if I told them that I went to a college or university and got a master's degree in business, they would think nothing of that. I can tell you that wouldn't have got me where I am today. It was the individual classes and the mentors and the seminars that I went to and hung around with people that are trying to do the same thing that I'm doing, or actually hang around with people that are already there.
Yes.
The last thing you want to do is be the smartest person in the room. You want to be in a room with the people that are a lot smarter than you, right? So go find those people, and now you can do it. It's with today's technology, with podcasts and audiobooks and the seminars and just the your mentor doesn't have to be somebody that lives down the road from you. What we're doing here right now might inspire somebody to do something different, and that's the whole hope.
Absolutely, and the idea is to do just that. So provide an opportunity for some content. Everyone, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. And I've interviewed a few folks that are doing different types of investing and taking care of themselves. Right. And I'm always intrigued that everyone has a different way that fits for them. And that's
Right.
my hope, is that that's what we'll find for folks today when they listen to this podcast. And so
Right.
I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with me today. And we started to unpack what unconventional investing is all about. And it isn't risky. There's lots of opportunity there for us. And anything that we get involved in does have some form of risk. But if there was an opportunity for our guests to get a hold of you and spend time with you, Chris, and maybe participate in any programs you have, get your book, how would they get? How's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
If you go to the prolificinvestor.net, there's a little coffee cup in the center that says have a free 30-minute virtual coffee with me. You can push the button, get access to my schedule, and we can have a private conversation and see if I can help you out in any way.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to make sure that information is in the show notes, as well as all of your social media contacts. Give everybody opportunity to reach out to find you in the manner that they like to. I just want to say once again, thanks so much, Chris. It was outstanding conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.